The wind cut through the trees like icy knives, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow. Samuel pulled his coat tighter as he trudged down the narrow path toward home, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. It had been a long day tending the animals, and the warmth of the kitchen fire was the only thing on his mind. Then, through the swirling flakes, he saw something, a small, still shape hunched beneath a bare oak tree. At first, he thought it was a bundle of rags left behind, but as he drew closer, the shape shivered. His heart quickened. It was a girl. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue, and her eyes half-lidded as if she were slipping away. Her clothes were thin, torn, and dusted with frost. Samuel could see her breath, faint and shallow, barely holding on. She looked younger than him, yet her face carried a weight of suffering he could not place. In that moment, the bitter cold no longer seemed to bite at him, it was all wrapped around her frail frame. She tried to speak, but the sound was no more than a weak gasp that dissolved into the wind. Samuel's instincts screamed to run for help, yet something rooted him there. His gaze dropped to the old wool blanket rolled up in his pack, the only thing keeping him warm on the long walk home. He knew what giving it up meant for him, but as he knelt down beside her, the choice had already been made. Samuel's hands shook as he unrolled the blanket, the rough wool scratching against his chilled fingers. He had patched it so many times it was more mended than whole, but it was warm, and right now it was the only shield he had against the winter night. Without hesitation, he wrapped it around the girl's narrow shoulders. The fabric swallowed her, and for the first time, she seemed to relax, her trembling slowing under its weight. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, meeting his, and in that fragile glance, there was both fear and something else, trust. Samuel knew she couldn't survive the walk to town in her condition. The snow was deep, the wind relentless. The barn wasn't far, though, and there, at least, she'd have shelter. Sliding his arms beneath her, he was startled at how light she felt, as if the cold had stripped her of everything but bones. Each step toward the barn was heavy with effort, the snow dragging at his boots, but he didn't slow. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with the scent of hay and animals. He cleared a spot in the loft, layering hay into a soft bed, then eased her down gently. From the kitchen, he brought a jar of water and a heel of bread, though she was too weak to eat. He draped another old feed sack over her legs. As he settled beside her, listening to the wind rattle the boards, Samuel thought of his mother's words, "Help anyone who needs it." No matter who they are, a morning light spilled through the gaps in the barn walls, casting thin golden stripes across the hay. Samuel stirred from where he had dozed, his back aching from the cold floor. His first thought was of the girl. She lay where he had left her, still wrapped in his blanket, her face a shade warmer than the night before. Her eyes opened slowly, and though her voice was faint, the small smile that touched her lips spoke louder than words. He offered her a piece of bread, breaking it into small bits so she wouldn't have to chew much, and tipped a cup of water to her lips. She ate only a little, but each swallow seemed to give her strength. Samuel knew she needed more than warmth and food, she needed a doctor. The closest one was in town, a half-day ride away, and he hesitated. He'd heard enough whispers in the village to know that helping her might stir trouble. Still, watching her fragile breaths rise and fall, there was no question. He saddled his old mare and rode hard, the winter air burning his lungs. By the time he returned with the doctor's satchel bouncing against his side, the sun was lowering in the sky. He hurried to her, heart pounding with worry, but she was still there, her eyes following him as he entered. The doctor knelt beside her, checking her pulse and murmuring something Samuel didn't catch. But the way the girl's breathing eased told him all he needed to know. She was going to live. Samuel woke the next morning to an eerie stillness. The usual sounds of the farm, cows shifting in their stalls, birds chattering in the bare trees, were drowned out by something heavier, almost electric in the air. Pulling on his boots, he stepped outside and froze. Stretching across the snow-covered field were rows upon rows of mounted warriors, their horses snorting clouds into the frigid air. The sun glinted off polished spearheads and beadwork, turning the scene into something both beautiful and intimidating. There must have been hundreds, 700 at least, standing in silent formation. They didn't move, didn't speak, only watched. Samuel's heart pounded, and for a fleeting second, fear gripped him. He thought of the girl in the barn, wondered if they had come to take her, or worse, to punish him for interfering. The warriors parted slowly, their horses stepping aside to create a narrow path. Down it rode an elderly man, his hair long and silver, braided with eagle feathers. He dismounted before Samuel, his deep-set eyes studying the boy with a gravity that made Samuel forget to breathe. The man spoke in accented English, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "The girl in your barn," he said. "She is my granddaughter. You gave her life when winter would have taken it." Samuel glanced toward the barn, realizing the weight of what had happened. The chief's gaze softened, but the silence of the warriors behind him carried a power that felt like the whole world was watching. The chief stepped closer, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots. In his hands, he carried a blanket unlike any Samuel had ever seen, woven in deep reds and golds, the patterns alive with intricate beadwork that caught the morning light. He held it out with both hands, his expression solemn. "You gave warmth to one of ours," he said, his voice low but clear. "Now we give warmth to you." Samuel hesitated, unsure if he should accept something so fine, but the chief draped it over his shoulders himself. The wool was heavy, warmer than anything he had ever owned, but it was more than just a gift, it was a promise, a bond sealed in silence. Behind the chief, the 700 warriors bowed their heads in unison, their breath rising like smoke in the cold air. Samuel felt a lump rise in his throat. He had acted without thinking of reward, yet here was a gratitude so vast it filled the entire field. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the bare branches, carrying with it a sense of peace. The chief met Samuel's eyes once more, a faint smile breaking the solemnity. Then, as silently as they had arrived, the warriors turned and began to ride away, their horses' hooves pressing perfect lines into the snow. Samuel stood in the doorway, the new blanket wrapped tightly around him, realizing that kindness was its own language, one that even the fiercest hearts understood.